好，各位来宾，欢迎出席由孟州文教基金会赞助、香港中文大学新亚书院、香港中文大学哲学系合办的第7届新亚儒学讲座第2讲。讲者为现任美国宾夕法尼亚州立大学亚洲研究学系历史亚洲研究与宗教哲学教授伍安祖教授。讲题为“比较视角下儒家经注与西方诠释的相遇与缺憾”，以英语讲述。大家手上除了讲座的资料册外，还另附一张问卷，请于讲座结束后，把填好的问卷投进接待处的问卷收理箱。Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second lecture of New Asia Lectures on Confucianism 2021, sponsored by the Muzhao Foundation and organized by New Asia College CUHK. It's our honor to have invited Professor On-cho to be our speaker. Professor Ng is the Professor of History, Asian Studies, and Philosophy at the Department of Asian Studies at Pennsylvania State University. The topic today is Chinese Confucian Exegesis, Western Hermeneutic Theory, and the Discontent of Comparative Thought. The lecture will be conducted in English. Inside the booklet in your hands, you should find a questionnaire. Please complete the questionnaire after the lecture and drop it into the lecture box over the reception counter. 讲座马上开始。时间交给讲座主持人，香港中文大学哲学系黄勇教授。The lecture begins now. Let me pass the time to the moderator, Professor Yong Huang, from the Department of Philosophy, CUHK. 请黄教授 ，Professor Huang, please.
So I'm pleased I just read this is the one was a long time chair of the university seminar on Asian studies of the university. That was studied by very and I was kind of co-chair for part of the long. He was the chair before I was still. So, Dr. On-cho is the professor of history, Asian studies, and philosophy, and the founding chair of the Asian studies department at the Pennsylvania State University. A specialist in late imperial Chinese collective history, he has published extensively on a wide range of topics such as Confucian theory, religiosity, ethics, and historiography. His books include the central Confucianism in early Qin, mirroring the past, and the imperative for understanding. His dozens of articles that were created in major articles such as law, philosophy, university, philosophy, political history, and of the history of ideas. In the whole editor, the book series on Chinese intellectual and the Confucian Academy of Journal of Chinese. He is also the vice president of the International Association of Asian Studies, and it sits on a group of a number of academic journals. So let's welcome Professor On-cho to this talk. Thank you all. Long time friends, old friends,
and we just hoped, fortunately. All right. So I have to thank New Asia College once more for arranging this talk in conjunction with the philosophy department. And of course, we all know that New Asia College is a stronghold of Chinese culture. And I also must say that the philosophy department here is undoubtedly, to me, the best place to do Chinese philosophy these days in the world. That is to say, Chinese philosophy in a global and comparative context, and it's indisputable. And if you want to argue with me, you're being silly, really. So I'm not just trying to praise my host. It is for sure that if you look at the faculty list of the department, there's no question that you have some of the best scholars in the world today, really, working in a comparative vein, while actually addressing heavy-duty Chinese philosophical problems and issues. Today, I'm not sure if I should even be talking about this sort of thing because, as I just mentioned, the philosophy department is full of experts in both Chinese philosophy and in continental philosophy. And that's basically what I want to talk about, the commensurate relationship between European continental philosophy and Chinese philosophy, really. So I'm wielding, brandishing the axe in the family of Master Ban, Ban. But anyway, forgive me for being audacious. Now, look at the title first. I think the word that should stand out is the word discontent. In other words, I am lamenting today. I'm actually griping a little bit today about the state of comparative philosophy in terms of our engagements with the Chinese philosophy in the first place, and also, I suppose, European philosophy. So really, the word discontent here is the German word Unbehagen. Unbehagen actually has the connotation of unease, malaise, rather than discontent as such. Discontent is too strong a word. But anyway, what inspired me to use this word is Freud's famous book, probably his most famous, and probably his best book, really, Civilization and its Discontent. So the discontent really is discomfort. So at the same time that I praise comparative philosophy, at the same time that I preach on its behalf, I'm somewhat uncomfortable with it, largely because of the epistemological conditions of its production these days. But we'll talk more about that. All right. Hey, first and foremost, my goal is to assert the fact that it's important for us to locate Chinese philosophy in a global and comparative context. I mean, if you look at a lot of the philosophy departments in Europe, in the States, you find that many of them are still merrily doing Kantian deontology. They're very, very happy. They're very, very self-satisfied. They are merrily engaged in the study of Aristotle, Socrates, as though the world has no other philosophies. So academic specialization, I can just cultural habits have really produced a condition where a lot of philosophies and thoughts in very many parts of the world are not dealt with in many professional philosophy departments in the world. Well, I have to say, my department at Penn State University is not exactly a good example. I've been asking them for years to hire a Chinese or Asian philosopher. Finally, it's happened. I'm happy to report. after years of pestering on my part, really, or begging. So the position actually has been approved finally. And as some of you may know, the philosophy department really is pretty strong in continental philosophy, according to them, they're number one. I'm not so sure. But the point is that we have come to a pass in global development, in world history, where it's simply morally and ethically incumbent on us to take a look at the world from a much broader philosophical point of view, instead of simply still focusing on, well, let's say Western theology, that sort of thing, or classical Greek philosophical tradition. Now, if we assert the fact that we are our past, then I would have to say that this we must include peoples, cultures of all over the world, right? So, now on the one hand, of course, we have to maintain the fact that different philosophical traditions are specific cultural products. We cannot gainsay that. We cannot deny that. We cannot reject that. So we have to assert that. So, Platonic thoughts, for instance, Confucian thoughts, Taoist thoughts, Buddhist thoughts, for that matter, are specific cultural products. But on the other hand, there's a reason not to think that they are mutually reinforcing, mutually complementary. Okay? So what I want to do, and in fact what I've been doing, is try to throw into sharp relief the complementarity between Chinese philosophical tradition and some other traditions. And of course, actually, in the philosophical circle, even today, actually, some people are mad that in the Journal of Philosophy, East and West, some guy wrote about the fact that, well, there's no philosophy in China. so a bunch of people are now up in arms. Now, this is such a tiresome and trite question. Is there philosophy in China? We've been talking about that forever, since the time Yuan. Of course, it's outside the definition. What do you think is actually philosophy, right? I mean, so you divide it very narrowly. Of course, you can say there's no philosophy as such in a professional, technical sense. There's no denying that Chinese thought is a philosophical tradition. So, but anyway, of course, if you juxtapose different traditions, there will be differences, there will be tensions. So, in the last 20 years or so, my focus really has been on hermeneutics. So really, my engagement with philosophy started out with something very, very traditional in the historical vein. I actually wrote a dissertation about decades ago on the Chinese Gongyang, so-called new script and new text tradition in the Qing dynasty. So actually, I was in heavy duty classical exegesis. So I was actually looking at the Qing dynasty commentaries to the Gongyang Zhuan, the Gongyang classic. But as I was doing that, I mean, I came to the realization that to the extent that one interprets, to the extent that one annotates, to the extent that one translates classical Chinese into modern Chinese, to the extent that the Qing dynasty scholars commented on the classics, all of them are in one way or another engaged in early tradition. And I come to the realization that there is a certain hermeneutic dictum, if you like, in life, and that is to say, what is it? Living is to interpret, reading is to read, reading is to understand. So essentially, to live is to interpret and then understand. All right? So in a very broad sense, then, the hermeneutic dictates that we engage with this question of seeing, hearing, observing, reading, interpreting, and understanding. So even if you are looking at the exegetical tradition in China, you simply cannot say that it's merely plain words. It's not just an effort to read the text, to plunge deeply into philological efforts, because all efforts of understanding, all efforts of reading, presumes a kind of methodological and conceptual framework. And the best way to describe these methodological and conceptual frameworks is to say that they are hermeneutical in very many ways. Okay? So once we ascertain the fact that Chinese classical exegesis is a form of hermeneutics, then it becomes necessary for us to think about this whole project, this really highly heterogeneous Chinese enterprise of reading classics in hermeneutical terms. So in other words, to read Chinese classical exegesis in philosophical terms. Okay? So therefore, there is a certain natural nexus between Chinese classical exegesis of the Western hermeneutics, and there is a good deal of commensurability, there is a good deal of commonality, a good deal of concordance, but of course, ultimately, to the extent that Western hermeneutic tradition is a specific cultural product, so is Chinese exegesis, we will come across dissonance, we'll come across divergence and difference. Okay? So, doing this kind of comparative work is to, as I put it here, to throw into relief the import of the act of reading in varying cultural contexts, right? So, but still, I want to assert the fact that the imperative of reading as understanding is a sort of, what I call it, englobing universal human issues. So I want to stress this commonality, and this commonality essentially is a reflection of our human condition. You know, of course, it takes different forms, right? Now, if you're talking about hermeneutics, you're talking about Chinese exegesis, you cannot talk about the classics. In other words, first and foremost, what are you trying to understand? What are you trying to read? What are you trying to interpret fundamentally? Classics. So you might say that one of my goals actually is to understand the continuing importance of capitalizing on our classics. And the way to approach the classics today can only be done in a comparative way. Otherwise, what you have is the continuing decline of the classics, which is a great shame because classics constitute the major cultural capital of various peoples and various cultures, right? Now, Western hermeneutics of this huge, big, vast world, the last, I guess, 20 years or so, where I simply have been focusing on the Dharma as an example of the kind of Western hermeneutics that is consonant very many ways with the Chinese exegetical impulses and the Chinese exegetical sort of orientations. You know, why so? Because Dharma, to begin with, initiated his project as a form of rejection of the Cartesian project of essentially celebrating scientific knowledge, right? So Gadamer essentially rejects disembodied, instrumental, and mechanistic scientific knowledge that seems to typify the major foci of the Cartesian philosophical project, right? So I think here I am, this slogan, je pense comme je suis, right, in the original French. Descartes essentially saying that, philosophy is foundationalist in the sense that our mind, our cognition, our ability to think, by ability to get tradition, is the foundation upon which we can create new way of thinking, right? So, on the other hand, if you look at Marian hermeneutics as a philosophy, what you see actually is the assertion that understanding is historically situated in the sense that understanding is really based very much on the authority of tradition. Okay? And when we're talking about tradition, what is the anchor? What is the encapsulation? What is the essentially a synthesis of tradition? Very often you appeal to the classics. So therefore, undoubtedly, in Gadamer's hermeneutics, you have the primacy of the classics. Yeah? So essentially, he acknowledges and celebrates the fact that the classics have the capacity, the ability to generate relevance for our own contemporary situations. Okay? And of course, he formulated this notion of biases, prejudices, and pre-understanding. Essentially referring to the authority of tradition. Okay? So essentially what Gadamer wanted to espouse is the idea that knowledge must not be disembodied. It must be practical, must be moral, it must appeal to the authority of tradition. And this appeal to authority is not submission to some kind of tyranny of past, but rather this is essentially an acknowledgement of a fundamental rationality of tradition. Okay? So with prudential judgment, as a result of the intervention and negotiations of various historical situations, and in the growth of appealing to classical tradition, we can actually forge practical moral knowledge. Okay? So the emphasis really is on our ties with our relationships with tradition, but not any dead and gone tradition, it's living tradition, So, so as a result, in Gadamerian hermeneutical philosophy, the so-called subject and object nexus cannot be logical. Subject studying mechanistic, disembodied matter. Okay? And of course, Gadamer, unlike the deconstructionist, has a very healthy regard for language. So, he has stated the fact that language actually is an effective tool to convey truths, because language is a part of tradition. So language can describe what reality, right? Now, even this very brief summation of Gadamer's ideas, we can discern a good deal of consonance or commonality between the Gadamerian position and the Confucian one. Look at this, the veneration of tradition, the classics, right? Very often actually, Gadamerian hermeneutics is described as a form of ontological hermeneutics in the sense that there seems to be this ontological understanding of continuity and mutuality with history and culture. There's certainly a resistance against this atomistic objectification of nature, which is the Cartesian project, essentially to dissect nature in a highly mechanistic way. So Gadamer's focus on practical moral knowledge seems to suggest that we immerse the self in the world through some kind of self-cultivation, right? A notion of cultivation. Last but not least, of course, you have the rather sober respect for the integrity of language. Right? So initially, I was attracted to the very project. Like, it's wow, this is good. Because we're looking at the machine, looking at the commentators, and we're trying to formulate more philosophically how the Chinese annotators or scholars of the classics view these good texts. Economics way of thinking to mirror is suggest that there is a good deal of interoperability between this Western way of looking at Chinese way. But of course, ultimately, there are a good deal of differences, right? So let's look at the discord between Gadamer hermeneutics and Chinese conception of knowledge. Well, ultimately, after we read the introduction of Gadamer's method carefully, he himself actually acknowledges that ultimately he has Kantian questions. So his ontological condition of understanding ultimately, I think, is epistemological in nature. Whereas we'll talk more about that, of course, the hermeneutics in Confucian sense aims far more at the apprehension of the whole being of the self and the cosmos. Of course, in Gadamer's thinking, you have this radical sense of historical situatedness. Our location in a particular moment is so much determined by the radical historicity of the very moment of reality. So that seems to be at odds with the Confucian sense of immanent transcendence. So the Confucian, what I call ontological, cosmological conception of learning seems to suggest that there is something that is underpinning our project, our effort, as opposed to this adequate sheer historicity. Okay? Of course, we look at the Confucian Tao, the Confucian belief. We have to accept that the way, as far as these Chinese Confucian scholars were concerned, were textual encasements of truths. But in fact, the classics embodies a kind of ontological oneness, the Tao, the Tian, that all of them subscribe to. Okay? So, if you look at actually the Qing heavy duty philological work, look at the preface. Oh, we try to Tao sages. I'm providing great understanding of the sages' ways. So in one way or another, the heavy duty philological work, has a philosophical purpose. The philosophical purpose actually is to retrieve and then to reveal, to illuminate the way, the Tao, So through very technical scholarship, they're really trying to tell us that, look, if we understand what the original classics mean, then we can engage in moral living, practical living. Then we know what the truths are, we'll seek to realize them, So I tend to view Confucian knowledge as a matter of practice. That's what I call it. So, matter of practice in the sense that it provides a sort of powerful metaphysical argument for our immersion in scholarship and in life at the same time. So this method of practice to me essentially is an argument for the continuity between knowing and learning. Okay? So what do you do? It could be the studying of history, it could be the studying of the classics. Essentially, the understanding is that reading and understanding are integrally a part of self-cultivation. Yeah. And if we can presume the oneness of the self, the reader and the learner and the sages, all those are the classes. Now I'll talk more about that. So I've written a few things on Jushi. If you look at Jushi's hermeneutics, the method of reading. Actually, I just wrote a piece on Ong's book, right? On Jushi. And the topic that primarily. But there is this presumption. The reader's mind is really one with the mind of the author. Because hermeneutics very often assumes a separation between the reader and the text. But in the case of Jushi, it's very clear. Look at the cases of many other Chinese commentators of the classics. The fundamental philosophical metaphysical assumption is that the reader, if he or she reads well enough, if he or she reads correctly, the mind of the reader is one with the mind of the author. So the prevailing abiding faith is that the reader, the learner, ultimately knows the minds and hearts of the sages. Right? So you see, so I don't want to go into details here. Suffice it to say that I point the idea that Jushi essentially pursues a kind of religious hermeneutics. So Chinese hermeneutics ultimately is religious in the sense that it subscribes to the notion of the transcending power of reading, the transcendent location of the reader. That is to say, if you read correctly, if you understand the classics correctly, you have transcended essentially your normal location, that you're one with the authors of the classics, with authors and classics, right? So, so as you know, Jushi essentially created this textual tradition based on the four books. So four books became a sort of fundamental textual manifestation of the metaphysical principle, which is of course, a major metaphysical notion in Jushi's ideas. So, so you look at his exegesis, look at his annotations, one way or another, actually, ultimately, he talks about the ultimacy of principle. Okay? Now, of course, if you look at hermeneutics, there are always a dual vision. And this dual vision is particularly pronounced, I think, in Confucian hermeneutics. On the one hand, there's no question that if you look at Chinese exegesis itself, you'll find the historical vision. The historical vision actually is to recall as best you can, or reconstruct as best you can, the past quasi-contemporaneity. And that is to say, through history, we come to know certain lessons. Through history, we come to know what the sages did. So we develop a pretty good picture of what happened once upon a time, what the sages actually wanted to tell us. So, therefore, if we act now, if we want to do things now, we can follow the sages, we can follow the classics, because we have this model, we have this paradigm, we have these instructions and precedents, if you like, that we can follow. So the past is very much regarded as a kind of quasi-contemporaneous situation. But on the other hand, over and above this historical recall of what the classics aim to tell us, you have the religious vision. This religious vision actually is to resurrect the past actual contemporaneity. So the past must then be understood in the present tense. The classics are always unfolding in the present tense. So the classics are always unfolding in the present tense. The extra is the real thing, the real reality of the classics in the midst of us. So ultimately, of course, it is the religious vision that wins out, as far as I'm concerned, if you look at, let's say, Tradition's Hermeneutic. Since ultimately, he views that the classics offers this ultimate picture of a good society. It offers us truth that we can resurrect every day, to the extent that the reader is one with the author, right? Now, so much so far we've been talking about essentially traditions, the Dogmarian, example of hermeneutics as an example of Western tradition of understanding or reading, and then mentioned Jushi as a representation of the major orientations of the classical exegetical impulses and projects and enterprises. Yeah. Now, I'm juxtaposing two, largely because I feel that we've got to look at them simultaneously. So, my lofty goal, if you like, is to read Chinese philosophy hermeneutically. And in fact, more specifically, to read Chinese exegesis hermeneutically, and therefore philosophically. And then, comparatively, eventually, I hope to be able to construct a Chinese hermeneutics that is historically faithful and culturally authentic. Now, this is very, very important. We'll talk more about this. So, in the process, I'm hoping we can create a kind of comparative hermeneutics that is philosophical viable in a more global sense, instead of just the kind of cliche, because I mean, this is so wrong. These days, we have cross-cultural communication all the time, Now, so on one hand, I have this lot, which I think all of us can agree with, right? But on the other hand, then, let me express my existential discontent. My lament. My existential discontent is that, well, look at the sentence. Our critical and ideologically self-aware approach to cross-cultural global congress is still much governed by theoretical perspectives and nomenclatures emanating from the Anglo-European world. How about that? Let's make enough lament. That is to say, I've been talking about how great, Jushi the hermeneutics is. I've been talking about, the Confucian way of reading, the worldview, the philosophical principle. It's great. But ultimately, how do you express those things? How do you represent those things? How do you describe those things? Well, you resort to the theoretical perspectives and nomenclatures emanating from the Anglo-European world. Now, so this discontent, this this discomfort, this sense of malaise is very much generated by the fact that we seem to be in an epistemological track. The condition of production of cross-cultural learning, ultimately, right now, seems to be determined by Western language, both English, and also those theoretical apparatuses, analytic tools that go with it, you know. So I sort of used a statement or a handwritten by Harvard Hildebrand, which I think, you know, says it all. He said, I think it's worthwhile to read it out. It is the old masters of Western theory. Well, Gadamer would be one of those masters, for instance. It is the old masters of Western theory who continue to describe the broad contours and grand features of the intellectual landscape, and whose influence is writ large all over the canvas. Indeed, many of the basic terms of reckoning and address which frame the study of contemporary East Asian culture, keywords like power, metropolis, postmodernism, nation, citizen, the notion of public sphere, science, begin with, you know, borderland, the bus topic these days, you know, the peripheral versus the metropole, you know, all these major issues and topics in humanities these days. Right? They're routinely glossed by a reference and thus different to their European American originals. So, in other words, in the process of our seeking to be faithful to a certain tradition, in this case, Chinese exegesis, our way of analyzing it, our way of understanding it, our way of representing it, our way of reconstructing it is very much done with reference to the ideas provided by the ancestors, Western ancestors, these old masters. So very often, whatever we say today has a kind of European or Anglophone ancestral version, you know. So how do you get out of this epistemological predicament, this entrapment? Well, the last, you know, really more than 10 years, I've been here and there, whenever I have the chance, to talk about what I think is the way to go about it. The way to go about it is to simply admit that we are doing a kind of what I call Eurotropic work, as opposed to Eurocentric work. Eurocentrism, bad. Eurotropism, okay, acceptable. Now, Eurocentrism is essentially this very artificial, hegemonic imposition of Western ways of thinking onto other ways of thinking. The application of Cartesian scientific model, the application of legality, universal absolutism, the application of scientific method, whatever the case. So in a rather wholesale manner, essentially impose upon Chinese matters a kind of analytic, some kind of conceptual framework that is entirely Western. Whereas the Eurotropic is an acknowledgement of the fact that world history has evolved to a point where we have no choice but to subscribe to certain conceptual, theoretical, analytic frameworks or patterns or tools or instruments or apparatuses, however you want to describe them. You know? So the Eurotropic resolution essentially is an effort to universalize and globalize whatever you're studying in the non-Western context, in this particular case, Chinese customs. So the idea is that even though we subscribe to certain ancestral ways of doing things that are Anglophone European, our ultimate goal actually is to universalize and globalize Chinese classics. You know? So we acknowledge that we are propelled by certain Eurotropic, but not Eurocentric conceptual schemes and categories. Okay? Now, of course, when you do this, the problems are real. You have the empirical data, as it were, you have the original material, Chinese. But at the same time, you have no choice but to make sense of these materials, these data, by using a kind of Eurotropic frameworks or schemes and categories, right? But that's okay. I think the problem is that for a long time, when we study anything that is known Western as well, to begin with, we tend to have this process of myth making in the background. And that is to say, there is this view thing. You know? And our goal is to extricate, discover this view thing. There is this real understanding of a certain Chinese classic, you know. But it's a myth. There can never be a pristine entity that is the authentic Chinese classic. There can be only various entities that can be used to represent whatever you're studying, you know. So by talking about this Eurotropism, if you like, this Eurotropic orientation, I'm trying to debunk the myth of the view thing. You know, especially you not so much now, it's that's not much. So very often, what's the one side? There are blind spots in the West studying or study of China. What have they missed? What they have not wrong? The implication is that, well, we won't get it wrong. We don't have those blind spots because we apprehend this pristine real thing, you know. There's a lot of la chose réelle, the real thing, right? No, there's no such thing. There's no la chose réelle, the real thing. We simply do the best that we can in order to come up with a representation. I hope I don't sound too deconstructionist, which I'm not. I'm a positivist, actually. But still, we have to acknowledge that there are only so many things that we can do. Okay, let me declare my epistemological stance. What should we do? My stance is that we have to read the Chinese classics with reference to Western hermeneutics. You know, so our reading of the Confucian Exegesis with reference to Western hermeneutics is located or cited or situated at the intersection of two spaces. We have to realize that. We're always negotiating these two spaces. First, my interpretive perspectives and my conceptual baggage. So in other words, you do have to sharpen your ideological awareness of your location and position or situation as an interpreter. But at the same time, the other text that I'm dealing with is the textual domain of the Chinese classics. So that being the case, when you negotiate these two fundamental facts, you generate a kind of hermeneutics that is two-faced. So as I put it, as we seek to represent in the most authentic way possible the meanings of the Chinese classics, we do so in accordance with our own philosophical allegiances and criteria of intelligibility. So ultimately, what is Eurotropism? Eurotropism actually is to establish a set of criteria of intelligibility. How do you make things understandable? How do you make things intelligible? Okay? I'm going to say, as we endeavor to universalize and globalize the Chinese classics, by reaching an authentic and empathetic understanding of it, we embark on comparative instincts and approaches that are unmistakably grounded in some Eurotrophic or not Eurocentric conceptual schemes and canons. Okay? So I'm the first one to admit that what I do is simultaneously Eurotropic and sinocentric. The fact of the matter is that guys say, oh, no, no, Chinese. What's the difference? If you use modern Chinese, it's not that different from English, really. Especially, Chinese philosophical language is highly Western. You know, basically modern Chinese is, if you put it negatively, infected by all sorts of Western cultural baggages already, you know. So by pressing essentially Western tools and instruments into service, and while maintaining a certain sensitivity, obviously, of what you're studying. By that I mean, you got to know the original sources. So you got to understand text first. By that I mean, the basic understanding of the literal meaning. Now, of course, when it comes to interpretation, you go beyond the literal first layer meanings of whatever you're reading. Okay. Now, the reason I'm doing this is actually I'm going back to my thesis. I never published my dissertation much because I was very happy with the theoretical approach or the lack that I adopted. I thought it was a pretty, I would say so myself, pretty substantial actually reading of the Chinese scholars' commentaries on the original Kungyang Torah. But I just, for a long time, couldn't figure out a more sort of conceptual way of representing really the importance of this Chinese commentary. So, I think I figured that out. So actually, what I want to do is finish a book on this Kungyang tradition, commentarial tradition. But in the process, essentially, I want to a kind of Chinese theory of reading, a kind of Chinese theory of reading that has some purchase for the understanding of Western hermeneutics, the Western philosophies of reading and understanding. So essentially, that is what I want to do. Oh, sorry. Well, that's it. That's basically what I want to say, except that I want to underscore what I mentioned at the very beginning of the talk, and that is the importance of the classics. Any classic at all. I'm not simply talking about Chinese classics. But you're talking Shakespeare. You're talking about Iliad, all these classics from the various traditions. They're always facing immense pressure of being eliminated from the major discourse of the day. And if you look at the English department, for instance, you suddenly study Shakespeare far less than before. No question about it. Well, because the idea is that, well, canon changes, the notion of classics changes. That is quite true. But I always tend to view that the classics in any tradition furnish the most valuable cultural capital. So to the extent that you are interested in understanding the past, you have no choice but to understand the classics. Not only that, the Chinese classics, the Chinese notion of jin, actually is unique. There is no such notion of classic in other cultures, in other people's history, unless you appeal to scripture. If you equate the jin with scripture, I guess you can make an argument that they are similar. But of course, we should. So the notion of jin, I mean, as you know, literally, is the warm fabric, right? That's supposed to be wet fabric. So essentially, jin represents the fundamental ways of binding things together. So in any fabric, be it a history, be it an institution, the warp with the major strands or threads that provide the fundamental state. So the word Jin cannot be found in other cultures. I mean, of course, in West, for instance, you have the notion of classical music, you have the notion of the Iliad and Odyssey as the classic, Shakespeare as the classic, but they don't have the kind of normative tradition that the Chinese Jin represents. So when you're talking about the four cultures of Jin, and talk about the Chinese classics, essentially, they operated in different world. They operated in this normatively driven domain where there is the acknowledgement that they represent the ultimate truths as conveyed by the sages. And it is incumbent on us essentially to retrieve, right? So this is really essentially a plea for studying the classics. Now, how do you do that? You cannot do it simply within the Chinese context. You have got to reveal and illuminate the plural significances of any classic at all. And the only way to do so is to do it comparatively. So that the global, multiple, plural significances of the classics can be brought to the forefront, shown to the chapter. So ultimately, I think I'm a classicist. So I thank you for your attention. I think we should devote more time for discussions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for for this very exciting and stimulating lecture, and also kind of I think inviting us to conceive a to construct a Chinese and Confucian hermeneutics. That is, as it is said, Eurotropic, not Eurocentric. And I think in the audience, we must have quite a few questions, comments, and so the floor is open. If anyone have the questions, please raise your hand. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this wonderful talk. I want to just go back a little bit, just elaborate on what you said in the beginning about like bringing Chinese philosophy or China into global academia, so to say. Because this is something I find profoundly important today and profoundly challenging as well. I mean, how can you do this? Because it's not only in philosophy, I mean, it's in literature. If you go to, I'm from Europe, and I mean, in Europe, I'm from Sweden more specifically, and I mean, in the department of literature or philosophy or even history might be a little bit better, but in most departments in humanities, I mean, there's nothing being done on China. That's in the sinology department. So I mean, this whole notion of area studies and Asian studies is something, it certainly has its merit, I think, but it's also, I mean, something questionable because it kind of removes, the effect of it is that it has removed China from the other disciplines. I mean, I'm interested in to see how you look at this from your career and have this change. So you talk about the philosophy department at your universities, they finally hire one person in Chinese philosophy because you asked them for many years. Is this, I mean, do you see this changing a little bit? I think you're giving us some wonderful tools for how we can like introduce this to people outside of China studies and make them appreciate the study of China. I mean, do you see this changing slowly in today's academia? Not just necessarily in philosophy. And I mean, yeah, practically speaking, how can we, except for what you mentioned here, do you have anything else to say about how we can introduce China to a global academic audience?
Yeah. First.
Well, that's a great question. Probably I won't have the answer for you, largely because you all know that Chinese studies or any studies at all, area studies would be regarded as a non-STEM subject. Anytime you have a non-STEM, you're a non-entity. So that seems to be the premise. Now, paradoxically, if you look at the development of sinology or Chinese studies or Asian studies in the West, there have been two sources. The first is religious missionary, right? The other is geopolitical, strategic. So in other words, why did, for instance, the United States start area studies? For strategic reasons. That's a very kind of approach. You got to know your enemy. So that's kind of very strange if you look at the start of sinological or Chinese studies or Asian studies in the West. The two projects are fundamentally at odds with our understanding of what the pursuit of Chinese studies is. Now, but I raise it largely because I want to underscore the fact that if there is hope, the hope may lie in the fact that people come to the realization that whether you want to agree with your friends or want to oppose your enemy, you got to know your enemy first. Then you got to do the friends thing. So, if it were to change at all, I think we need to drive home the fact to the politicians that it is of pragmatic and practical importance to develop these subject matters because you will deal with your enemies and friends in business, in geopolitics, far more effectively. So, in other words, make it very blunt. You're not doing it because you appreciate another country. You might disdain it. You might be contemptuous if it doesn't really matter. You have to know it. That's one argument. And I think it's there. It's there. For instance, as Professor Wong said, I found it actually part of it. Right after 2008. Somehow we embarked on this major project of Sandstone. And how come we were able to do that despite really dire financial situation? Well, that was because there were a couple of alumni. I think one was a history major, I suppose. But another major donor that actually was a business school director. Prof. He said, no, we've got to promote Asia studies. We've got to make our students understand Asia because they can do better business. So actually, this alumnus was a business school grad, very enthusiastic, supported the creation of a department that was willing to provide resources. So, the first part of my answer to your question is that we have got to clearly highlight the practical importance of doing it. So, now, of course, relatively speaking, I do understand that some knowledge for a long, long time in France and Germany, with vibrant psychological tradition. There for some time you reach some French, especially Germany, in order to do effective psychology. It's no longer the case. I don't see any French psychology. I don't see any French German psychology. A Swede, or not Calvin, is great, interpreter of the Chinese classic. But he was one of the first to reveal the special quality of Qi, the Chinese Qi, Or Swedish style. Getting worse and worse and worse.
So in order to turn the tide, I think we just have to highlight practical, pragmatic implications. I don't know. There's another question. Oh, I have to think more about that. We have to seize up on every opportunity to underscore the importance of pursuing Chinese studies, I suppose. That's what we do. Now look, I'm a senior professor, but I told my department, after I step down from the headship, I will focus on first year teaching. I will focus on introductory survey courses. Why? Because I want to talk to the greatest numbers of undergrads in an American setting. You know, there'll be other people who can teach, 10 people, 5 people in the graduate setting. No, I want to advertise the greatness, the goodness of Chinese culture in various ways in those settings. So that's my planned, meager contribution to the propagation of Chinese culture. Yes.
Yeah, Professor, I heard what you said, and then actually I agree with you that that is a great, if I get it right, discontent between the two culture, or the two world, I would say the East and the West. Okay. And I know that you are one of the pioneers. I can see that we try to make both meet, at least getting closer to each other, which I appreciate. But the problem is that you also mentioned the word geopolitics. Yeah. And that is actually really hinder what some of you, what should I call, scholars or some other people trying to do. I also have been in the Western world for a long time. And I know that they, for instance, the Western world, they are not really ignorant to the East philosophy. I would not even use the word Chinese philosophy. For instance, they admire Junji, because even the West Point, they all have to study there. And they always try to quote something, they say Confucianism, which sometimes I doubt very much. But they try to express this as a kind of philosophy, which is good. But unfortunately, now with the geopolitics in place, that actually they even try to close down some of the, what they call Confucianism, okay, which is a kind of disaster, the way I see it anyway. So I think that it's easy to identify the problem, but the difficulty is how to solve the problem. And I would really appreciate if you folks can do something about it. Well, we try our best in our own very minor, insignificant way. I mean, even in my answer to the first question, I've already once again expressed my discontent. Who may have my sense of malaise. But at the same time, you mentioned geopolitics. That's my point. The problem is that every time there are geopolitical tensions, the knee-jerk reaction is that, well, let's forget about our enemies. Let's not deal with them. No. In fact, if you feel that you have a problem with your enemies, you have to study your enemies far more deeply. You got to probe the weaknesses and so forth, strengths and whatnot. I try not to put them as an enemy, but I try to put them as solid hand. Okay, however you want to treat them. Even if you treat them as enemy, you still have to know them. That's my point. From a practical point of view, that's how you approach the world. Whether you want to eliminate someone or to work with someone, you still have to know this. No. Exactly. Right. Right. So even the West Point teaches forever. The top politicians, that's not how they behave, So as to whether there are actually quick solutions, no, of course not. Also,
the pursuit of area studies, as I said, is part of the non-STEM stream of things. Every time you're not part of the STEM subject, you're in some trouble. You have to justify yourself, you have to try very hard, you know. But it seems to me that if you map out certain strategies, this is my university is situated in a college town, which is the middle of Pennsylvania. We are actually in the middle of a rural community. And I dare say that a lot of our undergraduate students are still first-year university students, first time in the family's history, going to college. So when they grew up, not so much in the town area, but there are a lot of small little towns surrounding our campus. If you come from one of those towns, I dare say that many of them would not have had too much exposure to other cultures. I'm just trying to frame. So, on the other hand, if you look at the growth of my department, basically from nothing, now to about 60 majors. So we have around 20 majors in Chinese studies, which is language based, about another 20 or so in Japanese, and then 20 in generic Asian studies. Basically from nothing, about 60 something. And then every year, we teach Korean, Japanese, and Chinese, and Hindi, actually. Every year, we have around 500 students enrolled in our class. You know, our enrollment close to about 1,500 enrollment, so it's, I guess about 700 actually students per semester. You know, so that's pretty robust enrollment in a setting where, you know, international studies is not exactly hotbed, you know, where you know, it's a cultural interaction. It's not exactly, you know, a normal thing, right? Now, what explains this exist? Very simple. I think it's very important to have a good first-year teacher. You have to engage your attention. We do a lot of outreach. We talk about the importance of knowing other cultures, other languages. So you have to engage in promotional efforts, one way or another. And I think if you do it well, and if whatever you provide to the students, continue to engage your attention, say, oh, this is good, I'm learning, you know, I'm getting certain work. It's interesting and useful. As they progress in the language classes, if they get better, they get more motivated to go on, you know. So I'm just using the development of my own department as a kind of optimistic message that there is hope. And by no means easy. It's always a constant struggle. Very hard. You always wonder whether enrollment is going to go down. Now, go back to your point about your political tension. It's no question that overall, nationally, in the States, enrollment in Chinese classes have gone down quite a bit in the last 4 or 5 years, since Trump came onto the scene. However, my university has not suffered great losses in terms of enrollment. As far as the enrollment in Chinese, of course, enrollment in Koreans going off the roof. So much so that actually we just instituted a Korean major. So actually, 4 full years of a Korean language and culture study, and we have a very thriving K-pop clubs. And they stage these K-pop dance competitions and stuff like that. You know, right? So I tend to think that if you do a good and diligent job, you tend to be able to provide, let's say, quote-unquote, economic terms, a product that people want to use and buy. As simple as that. You don't want to use corporate language for running a business. What can you provide? So, yeah. Thank you for your question. thank you very much. You got to be enthusiastic for what you do. You know, I don't want to make it so high sounding to say that I'm a selfish about you. My mission actually is to promote as best I can the study of China in a setting where that kind of thing is not very congenially accepted.
Okay, On-cho, thank you very much for your rich talk, and I'm happy that I'm an audience, but not the moderator of your today's talk. So I got the chance to ask you some questions and to learn more from you. I think you offer us a very rich talk that touch upon some very difficult questions about doing comparative philosophy. That have long been discussing and debating among a scholar. So I have 3 questions. The first one is about your understanding of the discord between Chinese classical learning and Gadamer's philosophical hermeneutics. I may not agree with you some of your views on. For example, you say that the Gadamer's philosophical hermeneutics is essentially epistemological. So that's different with the existential or practical of Confucianism. I may not agree with you in this. And also you say that the Gadamer's hermeneutics also uphold a radical historicity. That may also different with the ontocosmological point of view of Confucianism. I think we can talk, discuss into the details, but one point you mentioned about the Tao and the oneness, the Confucian view. I think that is really important. At least at the very first impression, we will find there lies a difference between Gadamer's philosophical hermeneutics and the Confucian's classics learning, because as we all know that for Gadamer's interpretation is inherently pluralistic, but for Confucianism, at least we can find a lot of the textual evidence to support that. All Confucian scholars believe that what we are looking for in the classics learning is to understand the Tao, the original meaning in the text. That may be the understanding of their predecessor, of the past Confucian scholar. So this original meaning or the oneness in the classics and the pluralistic interpretations of the Gadamer, I think this seems to be a tension or difference or discord between Gadamer and Confucianism. Indeed, I published a paper to bring in Gadamer's hermeneutics to read Juicy's method of reading maybe more than 10 years ago. So I propose a way to solve this. And I think this tensions or this discord can be solved. But today I want to learn about what's your view on this, to learn more from you. This is my first question. And the second one is about, I think you also touch upon a very difficult questions about the asymmetry of doing comparative philosophy between the East and the West, or the Chinese and the Westerns. So I think there's a reality, I agree with you. For example, when we are doing comparative philosophy, we used it to ask whether Confucian ethics is Aristotelian virtue ethics. But I think we will not ask whether Aristotle is a Confucian. So I think this asymmetry is the reality, but even though that may not be reasonably justified, but that's the reality. And you try to bring in some answers to soften this asymmetry. And one of them is that you're trying to make a distinction between the Eurotropic conceptual schemes and categories. You think that's better than Eurocentrism? But my question is, I'm not quite sure whether this distinction is justified. So I want to learn more from you about the difference between Eurotropic, Euro-conceptual scheme and categories. They are different from Eurocentrism. Because when you adopt a Eurotropic, Euro-conceptual scheme, in other words, indeed you are following a Eurocentric way of thinking, Eurocentric way of understanding self, community, nature, cosmics. So what's make that difference with the Eurocentrism? So this is my second question. And my final one is I want to give you a concrete example. So, okay, we will follow the Euro, for example, the Eurotropic, the Euro-conceptual scheme and categories. I think the most, I think there will be a detrimental to understanding Confucianism, because in your talk you also mentioned about for Confucian classics learning, there's also religious aspects, not only a historical or understanding aspect, but also a religious aspect. In other words, the quest for the Tao. But you know, if you adopt a category, a conceptual scheme topic, and then I think you all know that the prevailing way of thinking is to make a dichotomy or separation between the so-called secular philosophy and the religion. So all this kind of the religious aspects should not flow into the understanding, at least philosophy. And that should be religion or faith or belief, but not cannot be done by conceptual, theoretical analysis. So I think that's also reality. Most of the Western scholars working on Chinese philosophy will not deal with religious topics. So that's my example to say that, okay, even following your suggestions to do comparative philosophy, not Eurocentrism, but trying to achieve, but it's okay to use some Eurotropic, Euro-conceptual schemes and categories that may also still have serious problem in do fair to understanding the Chinese culture, philosophy, and tradition.
All those questions I've had to deal with and wrestle with, actually. So it's not as though I don't share those questions you just asked. Now, let me first ask you a question. Do you consider your work as Eurotropic in any manner? Do you consider your own work Eurotropic in any sense? No. You don't. No, I understand. Forgive me for asking for this question, because you remember those words that I used to describe this particular theological condition of production of knowledge. It's not just philosophy, it's literary studies. I use terms like trap, I use terms like predict, all very negative words. So in other words, what I'm trying to convey is that whether we like it or not, we are thrown into this predicament, this situation of a trap. And how do we get out of it is a major issue. Now, your questions essentially pertain to ways how we may actually completely get out of this particular trap, such that to begin with, we don't even use the term Eurotropic in the first place. I am expressing a sense of resignation and exasperation. I don't want to be Eurotropic, but there's no way out of it. So therefore, I ask you the question based on my reading of your work. I read your work, wonderful work. Read your dissertation years ago, prize-winning dissertation. People here don't have best dissertation of the year. Because I work on I dare say that your work is entirely Eurotropic orientation. Very simple.
First, you're using a Chinese philosophical language, historical language, that is filled with European assumptions. But those elements are not necessarily detrimental. But what I'm saying is your entire way of conceiving things, your entire way of resolving whatever philosophical, historical issues is very much Eurotropic. By that I mean you're very conscious that whatever you do rises above the usual hegemonic Orientalist scholarship model that confines you to a particular prison of interpretation that immediately conveys a sense that you understand Chinese philosophy from a Western point of view. I don't get that from your work, but I distinctly get from your work the sense that you are trying to represent and make clear what you want to say by going with a certain language, by going with a particular way of thinking that is congenial to one who is at home with Western historical study or Western philosophical study. That is my point. So I'm sorry if I have to answer your question that I sense the disease that what is the difference between Eurocentrism and Eurotrophism? Huge difference. Because if you look at the scholarship of, let's say, other practitioners, Roger Aids, you yourself, Hong Yong, you name it, Theodore de Berry, all those guys pride themselves in understanding the original language. Chinese, I think we understand it pretty well. You know, and I think we can do some kind of philological explication if we want to. You know. But do we actually express what we know simply in the form that a Dai Zhen or a Duan Yu Tai did? No. Why? Well, that is because the Eurotropic intervention has already there for decades, for centuries. You know. Now, your first question, oh yeah, in the process of highlighting discord, of course, I probably exaggerate the radical sheer historicity of Gadamer's thinking. Of course not, because the very fact that he expressed very sober sense of respect for tradition as a continuum already undercut this very thoroughness of being one in a historical mode. No, the sense of continuity very much reminds me of the Confucian scholar sense of continuity. As to whether Gadamer ultimately pursues an epistemological project, yes and no. Because as I said, if you look at the introduction, go back there, he said it very clearly. Ultimately, he's answering a neo-Kantian question, which is epistemological in nature. Now, but does it mean that there are not a good deal of ontological, cosmological considerations that go into his meta-method? A good deal. So, for instance, the description of practical moral knowledge very much reminds me, you know, when I read it years ago of he talks about that. So it's not just merely disembodied pursuit of knowledge. It's just not pure epistemology. How do we get to know? You know. So yes, but I think ultimately, when I read truth and method, I don't get the sense that I'm reading teaching. I mean, the other talk. You know, I refer to the Duan guy. I don't think you have that in God. Yeah. And why is there no such thing? That is precisely because of your definition of God, what you want to know. That's one thing. And the other is, of course, God being a pluralist. And as you said, the Chinese commentators class as monists, right? No, I don't think we need to exaggerate the difference too much. We look at the commentary traditions. So, in China, what do you see? You see not a monolithic approach to classics. You see a good deal of heterogeneous approaches to classics. So my point is that the Chinese scholars actually were playing with a slight, they're doing some kind of math. They claim that they're doing monistic work. They're doing pluralistic work, actually. The classics are always sites of contestations. That's why you have tons of people disagree with each other, even though they say, they claim that we are abiding by this one Tao. They have to say, but actually, the Jushi's understanding certainly is quite different from Chenya's understanding of the Tao. You know? So I think this pluralistic or monistic orientation, the classics, in some ways is an illusion. I'm the first one actually to talk about the heterogeneity in Chinese commentary and traditions. But I got to read your piece of Gadamer and Tushi because what I call reading matches. And yeah, as I said, we have to discuss.
Actually, he asked my question already. Second.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Am I entirely confident that my so-called Eurotrophism is really that different from Eurocentrism? Yes. But on the other hand, practically, strategically, how you pursue scholarship is where you tell the difference. You are Said, lambasted Orientalist scholarship. Well, I dare say scholarship is Orientalist. Because from a Confucian point of view, he is essentially describing a certain epistemological condition of the production of knowledge. The condition is such that all of us are Orientalists to begin with. Right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your clarification. I just want to make a very short remark to ask whether you agree that, okay, even we have to employ, nowadays, it's the reality, we have to employ some Eurotropic, conceptual scheme and categories to do Chinese philosophy. But I think it should involve a very complicated appropriation of ideas, concepts. We have to fill in all these conceptual scheme and categories, fill in very rich Chinese context and also the Chinese meaning, and trying to reconceptualize this conceptual scheme and categories to, of course, lead to a more rich understanding of some we say philosophical questions globally.
Totally agreed. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm in total agreement with you. I'm simply saying that I just have no other way of describing what we are doing. Now, whether there's better Eurotropic scholarship, not so good Eurotropic scholarship, of course. But I just don't see any reality. So let's be honest, Barry. This is what we're doing. Yeah. Roger Eames' work would not have been possible without American practices. Donald Monroe's work would not have been possible without his early training in teaching philosophy. For that matter, A.C. Graham, same thing. A.C. Graham years ago, he didn't use the word Eurotrophism, of course. He said as much. It's always no choice but to employ some of these listeners. Now, we can disagree with Graham's interpretation of also but you wouldn't disagree with him on grounds that he violated, is understood, is appreciated, the Chuck brothers, right? That's my point.
Thank you. Thank you for the. I enjoy very much your talk, and especially I think you raised very important, point of view, especially with the term that I get to know first time as you play the term Eurotropic, and then you emphasize that it's different from Eurocentric. But at the same time, what is particularly important is that the way philosopher who trained within the European and American tradition and work on Eastern philosophy, Chinese philosophy in general, and then in your case, you limited it to the Confucian tradition. And then, but deciding this Eurotropic approach can help you to raise some new mode of understanding to the universal status or universality of the traditionally the Chinese Confucian text. So now the interesting question is then, if it is just Eurotropic, that means you raise the questions, the philosophical question from a certain kind of topos, areas, problematics, conceptual schemas from the European tradition, especially, well, you haven't specialized whether it is contemporary, modern, or back to the ancient, etc. But in any case, now this with the determinant of Euro, then it should be just fitted or arise from a certain cultural background. But then it helps us to understand the universal significance of Chinese Confucian texts, which cannot be seen or understood in the what we call the proper, the ancient, the traditional way of exegesis. Now, then there's really amazing is that then why a merely geographic cultural approach, what you call Eurotropic, can take out something which far away from Europe, from European Confucian, the Chinese one, the ancient one, which is universal. Then the question will be, if the Eurotropic approach, in terms of its methodology, in terms of its articulating concept, if they don't have a kind of universal validity, how can the work done out, how can the analysis work out from this Eurotropic approach can arrive at something, the result which is universal from the East? Then either there's no real truly universal significance, or else this Eurotropic is not merely regional and cultural one. They have in itself embedded something theoretical, which has a universal form. So, and then now, what is still interesting is that then in the introduction, I see two terms here. In the culture, they call it culture. But in your talk, you haven't touched on this. But I think there is something which is precisely close to or related to this Eurotropic approach, because precisely it's related to your this intercultural endeavor, cultural endeavor. So our understanding of the validity of that Eurotropic approach, would it to be should it be explained more differently? I mean, clarify it more about, even though we have the prefix Euro, but does it mean merely culturally valid, or in fact there is something more? Right. You think there's something more? Right. What is this? That's my curiosity.
Very good question. I was trying to drive home the fact that there is a certain universality built into purpose, to the extent that right now, you're talking about scholarship, anywhere at all, you have a particular general way of doing things And in that sense, you can consider that thing as universal, right? So Eurotropism, to begin with, has certain universalist pretension. That's how things should be done. Now, the question of cross-cultural or intercultural interaction, very important. And in fact, actually, my kind of written version, I presume that the foundation of Eurotropism actually is interculturality. Interculturality. You know, they go hand in hand. So therefore, if interculturality is the basis of this Eurotropic pursuit, then by definition, it is universal in that sense. You know, to the extent that it must involve in multiple cultures. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to sort of clarify my position. My position is always that Eurotropism is meant to be a kind of overarching methodology and view that we adopt in doing work that involves intercultural interaction. To guard against this intercultural interactions into lapsing into a kind of hegemonic superordination and subordination, it is important, therefore, to come up with a particular systematic view of what this epistemological condition of knowledge production is. So I don't disagree with you. In fact, I agree with you. In fact, I thought I had already explained that, but not really clearly enough. So my clarification right now is that you are absolutely right. Eurotropism is meant to be universal, as opposed to Eurocentrism, which cannot be universal, even though it pretended for a long time to be universal, because the Western way of looking at things is the way of looking at things. You know? So, yeah, a very brief answer to your very, very good question. Other questions? What's exactly this? You didn't pay me. No. Oh, it wasn't very good. Okay. I don't know. Today is fine. We'll start. There's only starting because the solution run out. Okay. So yeah, if not, let's thank you for the lecture. Discussion. Thank you very much.
第7届新亚儒学讲座已圆满结束，谢谢伍安祖教授、黄勇教授，也感谢各位的参与。再次提醒大家花一点时间填好问卷，并投进接待处的问卷抽屉箱。我们来年再见，谢谢。That's the end of the lecture today. Thank you, Professor Ng and Professor Huang, and also thank you for all for coming today to join this lecture. Please be reminded to complete the questionnaire and drop it into the lecture box over the reception counter. We are looking forward to seeing you again in the lectures on Confucianism next year. Thank you very much.